Division, conflict, hubris, arrogance, grandstanding, certitude, anger. Just a few words which it seems to me sum up much of what life is becoming, and which once it was not. I suppose, like most of us of a certain age, I have memories of an earlier life when the constant presence of an extended family living locally and a very real sense of community fostered an understanding in all of us growing up through childhood into adolescence of the inherent value of compromise, cooperation and inclusivity. For the most part, neighbours, whether family, friends or just neighbours, could be relied upon for support in the absence of hard-pressed parents obliged to work long hours, often across several jobs, just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. But that's what they invariably did. In the late 1960s and early 70s, I was what was then known as a latchkey kid. The minute I landed at junior school, I was entrusted with a single Yale key to the front door of our tourist house in Bradford, which would allow me to look after myself at home for the 2 to 3 hours between school finishing and at least one of my parents coming home from work, if the buses were running on time, which they mostly did. But I don't remember ever feeling vulnerable or even lonely. The rented TV we had provided company and entertainment in the form of wacky races, Top Cat, Hector's House, Rhubarb and Custard, Blue Peter, and on Fridays, Crackerjack. At 5 to 5, of course, Peter Glaze and Leslie Crowther. Wonderful. And school holidays could make for occasional long days of solitude, but Casey Jones, Champion the Wonder Horse, Pipkins, Bagpuss, The Herbs, Banana Splits, Skippy the Bush Kangaroo and the Clangers became my two-dimensional friends. And if it came to it, the then BBC Two trade test transmissions were an excellent educational source in the early afternoon. It may all sound like some dreadful Dickensian tale of poverty and privation, but I always felt safe, as did my young peers and local school pals. We could all be sure of the nearby presence of a helping and caring hand from those members of the community who, whether through shift work, retirement, holidays, or just being one of the few non-working housewives, were available and understood the unspoken, the unwritten rules about a collective responsibility to keep the kids safe, and as far as possible, away from mischief. But that part didn't always work out. Where we lived was an inner-city area comprised of privately owned small 2-bedroom tourist houses and council-owned 3-bedroom semis rented out to families. There was no private rental. It just wasn't a thing back then. Not where we were. The local authority understood its legal and moral responsibility to provide social housing, and did so, allowing those working-class parents who weren't well placed to secure a mortgage to live a fulfilling and secure life, free from the constant corrosive worry of being hoofed out onto the streets by a private landlord suddenly deciding to realise his assets into cash. Neither of us in either category felt that we were in any way of higher social status than the other. We just got on with it. Men would occasionally settle their differences over a pint or two down the local pub or social club, and women might do so by way of a heated exchange across washing lines in the backyard, but never the front yard. Either way, those differences were settled and largely forgotten with the passing of another day. I got to thinking, why is it that life today is so characterised by brinkmanship and polarised views on a level which it never seemed to reach back in the 60s and 70s? Back then, grievances had a limited shelf life and were often quickly buried beneath a host of more pressing considerations rooted in the real world of living a life. But today, it seems to me that differences and the animosities that so often accompany them not only endure but grow with the passage of time, and in some cases are taken to the grave. I fondly remember a time when, if consensus could not be achieved, people invariably arrived at an amicable understanding of their differences and made every effort going forward to avoid straying into controversial territory. In that way, a certain harmonic nature underpinned how individuals, families and communities interacted, much like the unremarkable and unflustered lapping of waves against the shoreline. A gentle and dignified ebb and flow of the human condition and life's varied daily interactions. Yet today, those waves seem to be perpetually crashing against rocky cliffs with little or no understanding of the life-affirming benefits of mutual respect and occasional compromise. So many people adopting absolutist positions in a world which is far from absolute. Such expressions of certitude in such uncertain times, and the flames of difference and disagreement constantly being fanned by the manipulative predilections of much of the broadcast and print media, hell-bent on spoon-feeding us vitriol and hatred because they think we are all stupid. If in this health and safety obsessed age you could wrap your fish and chips in newspaper, that's all that newspapers would be good for. I see this propensity to become almost factional within the comments on my YouTube channel. Just occasionally there will come along a response oozing with indignation if I or another contributor has appeared to malign a Triumph or a BMW or some other cherished mark. This in turn will often provoke a contrarian response from someone in one of the other camps, and so on it goes until either it burns itself out or somebody completely oversteps the mark and is zapped into oblivion by the algorithms. I get that people have passionately held views on their bikes, but it's never worth falling out over. Fortunately, most of us don't. Well, not yet. Of course, all of this is just one tiny manifestation of a much bigger problem. Examples of this uncompromising partisanship are to be found at every turn. On the macro scale, conflicts between nations are front and centre of our awareness today, whilst on a smaller scale, social media has provided a platform for angry men and women, mainly men, to mount venomous assaults on all and sundry in a way which their inherent cowardice would prevent them from doing on a face-to-face basis. So it's fair to ask whether all of this is real or imagined. Is it just something we are more aware of in this all-informed online world, or is it in fact real and present in our societies? I think that both hold true, but knowing or believing this does not of itself explain why people are getting more and more angry over affairs of little or no real importance. My own belief, for what it's worth, is that it is the breakdown of those very community values I was describing at the start which have led to the current situation. People who feel insecure and anxious tend to become angry and frustrated, and in a bizarre way, that anger and frustration can act as a distraction from the feelings of insecurity, hopelessness, and low self-worth. I read and hear that we boomers and Gen X's will be the last to enjoy higher living standards than those of our parents and grandparents. This may well be true. Unless you have the good fortune to belong to a privileged family line, then in today's world as a young person, your opportunities will become increasingly limited as everything that we as individuals once own and could influence soak away into the coffers of the hyper-wealthy corporate world. The same thing applies to the state. Every asset you can mention has been flogged off and replaced by borrowed or artificially created money. No wonder we're becoming increasingly anxious and angry. It's all crept up on us through a combination of stealth and gaslighting, and it is still, for the most part, hidden in plain sight. Back in my day, ordinary working young men and women could afford to own their own home at a relatively young age, allowing them to establish a secure base from which to start a family and thereby create the bedrock for tomorrow's society. That is no longer the case, and they wonder why the birth rate is down. Go figure. Yes, we are more divided and angry than ever before, not because we have become so, but because we have been made to become so, for the general entertainment and enrichment of those who regard us as nothing more than animals in a zoo, to be kept fed, watered, and sedated by an increasingly controlling establishment. I wonder if we will ever wake up to these dreadful and ever-increasing injustices. Perhaps, ironically, it falls to us, the boomers and X's, to call it out in the interests of our young, for we can remember the good times.